Okay, so the StuG is done being built, so I am going to do a sort of review of the build process and problems I ran into and stuff that went well, and I plan on doing this with anything that I review, in case people watch a lot of my stuff. The intention has always been review stuff in the box, and then show completed build stuff. Now, there would also be painting and other stuff, but these are the two in my head that I know I plan on doing with everything. So, where do we start here? Suspension I covered in the StuG Life update. The pegs were broken off that sort of dictated where these things sat, but that wasn't a huge deal. So suspension stuff was relatively easy, and there was nothing really to report, even though it was like half of them were broken. It was pretty easy. The rear plates, so this stuff here, there were these little raised, you can see one right, let's see, there's these little raised pegs that are uneven for whatever reason, so I had to basically just file them straight. Could have removed them, I guess. I don't remember dealing with them in my Panzer III build, but I talked to everybody I know, and I know about 30 guys building the StuGs right now, and they're on every Dragon kit, and they're always almost uneven, which is weird. Like, so this side will be higher than this side. So once that was taken care of, I could get that grill in there, and then I can get these other pieces on, which, by the way, this makes it really hard to paint the exhaust when this assembly is like this. Next thing, in sort of going chronologically through the instructions, was these PE things, these little photo etch brackets that go here, here, and here, and there. This one got knocked off later and put back. They're not as scary as they sound, especially that guy, because you can see they have like raised channel, or it creates a channel that you can jam them in. Some of them less so. These front ones not so much. You just have to glue them onto those shapes. So that gets a little, I guess it was more intimidating than it was hard, and they look really nice when they're done, and you feel like a pimp because you're like, wow, look what I did. The superstructure was the next thing, the outer part. So right away I'm going to tell you that if you're building, I'm assuming any of these, leave this piece off, because this is not molded into this large casemate thing, and I'm pretty sure I was supposed to leave that off to mount the gun, and then I could glue this guy in. But if you don't, it makes it difficult to get the gun through this opening and then mount the floor correctly to the lower hull. Apart from that, it was simple. There's only a couple pieces. I didn't put any spare tracks in here. Oddly, because I decided to do the hatch stuff first, now I have no clearance for extra tracks there, so I may put some here. I don't know. But whatever. That part of the build, relatively easy. Which brings us immediately to the MG Shield hatch debate we had on the Google Plus group. So, right there, that little thing in between the shield and the hatch, it's a little hook that comes up, and you hook in that part of the hatch to it, and that's how the shield stays up. That's apparently the only way the shield can stay up, and luckily my stuff just wasn't glued too hard to just basically change it. I glue things very, very delicately, and they hold, but normally if I need to get them apart, I can. So I originally had the hatch down flush, then I had to push it back up, then I was told about that little hook thing, so then I had to find a spare one because the one in the kit was broken, as were many things in this kit. But I eventually got it repaired. So yay. Now that it is how it's supposed to be. But that was one hang-up. I think it's not explained fully in the instructions. It's a very vague diagram. But that's what it should look like. Thanks to my man Panzermeister36 for hooking me up with, well, all of that information. Okay, also involved in that area was the fact that early StuG 3s had cupolas with ball bearings that could rotate, so I wasn't sure how to install it. I ended up going with a hatch straight back, and the periscope is actually off at an angle, which I think kind of looks cool, because, you know, this needs to go where the gun goes, but the the commander could be looking wherever he wants. So I like the idea that when it's together, he's sort of, like, he's looking that way, but, like, the gun's pointed that way. It's interesting to me. So anyway, you can put it, if it's an early, so before the ball bearing plant in Schweinfurt was bombed, they had rotating cupolas, so you could, in theory, with an early, make it pointing whatever old way you wanted. As well as we were discussing, that I guess commanders would unbolt them, turn them in a way that was, you know, that they wanted, and then just rebolt them on, so that's pretty cool. Next thing that was a major assembly was these radios. How do I explain the radios? They were a little convoluted, the instructions. It took me a minute. They're pretty simple, though. Not that I'm calling out anyone else in the group build who may or may not have built the radios correctly. Shane. But, yeah, relatively simple. If anybody has good color reference, by the way, of what these things should look like, I have no clue how to paint them, so. Let's see. The engine deck was uneventful. These things don't stay on as well as I'd like them to with extra thin, so actually these are all glued on with standard Tamiya cement. And I had to drill these holes out because it would continuously pull off these armored covers whenever, because these aren't glued on, as a lot of these things aren't glued on properly. Anything I have to paint is either white glued or whatever. And now I can't get this back on. Don't care. But yeah, the engine deck and all the tools and stuff back here is relatively simple, apart from, and we had the issue with this, that doesn't help, this right here and this right there. The instructions are strange, the locator marks are weird, so mine go up at angles like this instead of straight. I think I may have talked about that in the update, but apart from that, all of this was easy. Then you have the gun assembly, like this looks a little off. Not too bad though. I could in theory like put some pressure on that and try to bend it, but I don't really care. The gun built up really, really simply. The seats and everything with the floor, all of it goes together really quickly. My biggest issue was because I had to install this piece, trying to get all of this through here, and then trying to get this mantlet sort of, it's so big and bulky, you have to sort of pop it over. Let me see. Like through here, into here, and then onto the stuff that's inside of here is actually quite difficult, the way that I did it. It worked, it was just I think I did it stupidly. So then, that's primarily like the major steps, and then you just assemble everything. There was a little bit, can't see it anymore. I had a tough time getting it to seat 100% how I wanted it to, like all of the fenders and superstructure stuff, so I had to put quite a lot of pressure on it, some pretty heavy glue. And it's probably not even perfect if you could see the seams up there, but there's tracks in the way, so nobody cares. After all that, I ended up on the cables, and this is where things went awry for me. You can see, I don't know if it's going to pick up in here, I'm in a darker space than normal, but there's some marring on the side of the superstructure right here. This bolt got kind of mangled, so he's all oversized and globby now. And actually, in trying to clean up some CA, I used acetone to try to get it off, which just marred the surface of the plastic. So this general area here is kind of mangled. Not the end of the world, seriously. That night I was swearing a lot and stuff. But I didn't anneal the cables first, and I was using slower drying CA, and how I solved the problem was just like instant dry stuff. So I'm trying to stick it to the fender there and here, and I would hold it and nothing, so I'd gob more CA on it. Like it's funny, you start having a problem and you revert to like a guy who doesn't know what he's doing. everything else in this build had gone really, really well, and then that night was just a nightmare. So, this one was less of a problem. I don't know that it's sitting exactly how I want it to, but that's getting a little bit psychotically nitpicky. If I really, it's fine, I think. But I may, depending on my budget for this stuff, I would prefer the copper ones, because these things suck. They look fine, I guess, but also Dragon's suggestions for length were completely wrong. Like, they weren't 100, they said like 130 and 135, and they ended up being like 120 a piece or something like that. It really annoyed me, actually. Like, the whole build, I think this is the cleanest thing I've ever built. Like, it just fell together. And there's a very rewarding kind of feeling where you're like, oh my god, that looks just like it's supposed to. And then, bleh. And the only reason I think it bothers me is because your success builds up as sort of a happy feeling. You're like, it's like you think you're going to pitch a no-hitter, and then, bleh. But that's the nature of life and modeling, so deal. It happens. But overall, man, this thing is frickin' beautiful. I really like it. The keen observer will notice that my tracks are glued on. They actually are glued together as full runs. Like, so when I do magic tracks, I do it in a long strip with Tamiya standard cement, not extra thin, and then I wrap them around with normally with an opening like here or something. Now that's different than guys who do it up here, because all I needed to do is relax, because none of this is glued on. So this is all white glued. The rollers, the dry sprockets, the idler, and the road wheels are all white glue. Like, what is it? Whatever Micro Industries stuff is. Crystal clear, I think. Yeah. That's all, I had no use for it otherwise, so I just started gluing wheels on with it. So, this is the first time I've ever actually glued the entire shape together, though. Normally I'll have a break here, just so I can, when I take them off, it'll just loosen, just to help with this. But basically how I end up doing is I take the whole assembly off, and then when I paint them and they're protected, they're clear-coated, I'll put the sprocket over on this side, and then I'll fit the sprocket and the idler back in to the track assembly, and then I'll pop the whole thing back on. Then I can feed the wheels in, like, at an angle onto their guide horn and back into the spot with actual cement. Doesn't always work. I did it with the NAS horn, but not completely like this. But the tracks were perfect on this side, and then they were giving me hell on this side. So the only way for me to get exactly the shape I wanted was to just glue it all together. And I sort of was like, alright, fine. Screw it. We'll see if this works. So hopefully it will. I think it will. Because when I do workable AFV club tracks on Tigers, they're fully assembled. But they have a bit of give, but they don't have give past the point of where they need to be. The annoying bit about these Panzer III and StuG kits is they don't have adjustable idlers, so I can't swing the idler back. Although that's a little bit weird when you have your tension glued in. But that's kind of it. Yeah. You can more heavily recommend these things when you've built them than when you look at sprues, and frankly, I hadn't built a StuG when I reviewed it, and I think this thing is amazing. It's a very similar sibling to the Panzer III that got me obsessed with Dragon in the first place. Couldn't really ask for anything better apart from I didn't like the cables. The last thing I'll mention, though, is aerials, antennas. I just cut off the little nubs there, because I don't know why Dragon puts the nubs there. I don't know if that little extension that comes out is supposed to be like a thicker bracket that holds the actual antenna itself, or if it's supposed to represent the antenna. So the easiest thing for me to do is to snip that bit off, and then pin vise out those things. So then these probably, to be honest, won't be the final ones. So then I just stretch sprue at 1/35th equivalent of 2 meters, and that's what I'll have in there. So I'll have to glue them in, and they're not sitting correctly just yet. I may make them thicker, I may make them less tapered. I'm not sure, but essentially, yeah, you'll have those two aerials there. So, yeah, they are a standard size. They're 2 meters high, excuse me. What angle or how bent they are is sort of up to interpretation, but they should be that height. So, there you go.